Any good collection has a great number of different niches and subcategories. Music and record collecting is no different. Some of us focus on rare soundtracks or hard-to-find instrumental music from Europe and the US that was released in the 1960s and 70s. One could scour record stores for years and spend a great deal of money trying to chase down these revered sounds, or you could just pick up some releases by Frank Maston and be done with it. Frank Maston, who goes just by Maston, is an American musician, composer, and producer who pays homage to these sounds, but through his own lens. In fact, Maston has chosen to live abroad in search of authenticity and finding musicians to work with who share his own vision. What's most interesting is that while Maston is a musician and composer, he appears to be most at home producing and arranging his projects much the way that record producers like David Axelrod or Jack Nitzsche did. While Maston creates the pieces of the puzzle, his true art comes to light in putting it all together. Recently, Maston teamed up with the Swiss sextet Leclair to produce an album titled Souvenir, which has all of the deep, funky, melodic grooves of those rare records we crazy collectors are always chasing. On this episode, Maston joins me from his apartment in Paris, France, to discuss the makings of the new album, leaving his home to set out in search of his musical destiny, and how he sets the stage to bring his musical concepts to life. Glad to have you. Thanks for meeting me this morning. Where are you right now?
I'm in Paris, France.
What time is it in Paris?
It's 4 p.m., 1600.
Okay, so that's good. I was afraid you were in California and it was bright and early in the morning, but you're ahead of us today.
Yeah, we did the math. I think it worked out pretty well.
Very good. So, Frank, we've got an interesting project here to talk about with you, and it is called Souvenir, and it's a collaboration between yourself and a group from Geneva called Leclair. How's my pronunciation there?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Leclair.
So tell us about the connection. Tell us about the new record.
Connection started, I used to live in Holland, and I was playing in a Dutch band for about 4 years. And through that, everybody that I played with in that band kind of went off and started other projects when we stopped. And, you know, through some of those other projects, I was introduced to Leclair, who was just sort of coming up in Geneva maybe a few years ago. And I was really blown away by the music. You know, everybody was sending it to me, telling me I would really like it. And then we met and we hung out, and I thought instantly that it would be a nice fit to have them as a backing band, and maybe, you know, back me up live or back me up on my next record in the studio. And so the next batch of songs I had this was 2018, I brought it to Leclair and we played together, and then we went over to the Netherlands and recorded the LP with my friend Jasper Geluk. We did that, you know, mostly live in the studio. So the record is my songs with Leclair playing as well.
And what else are you doing on the record? So you're kind of the composer, producer, yeah?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So what's your role? Like, if you did a live show, what are you doing with them, or what are you most comfortable doing live?
Yeah, we've done a few tours together. We did a few shows actually a couple of weeks ago in Switzerland, and our lineup is what's the band, and I play keyboards. I play a couple different keyboards, and I sing. Occasionally, I play flute.
Cool. That's a cool. That's an unexpected turn. You move from the keyboard to the flute.
Yeah, there's a little bit of jumping around.
That's good. And how did you guys collect? So were all of these pieces fully formed when you kind of brought these tunes to them, or did you kind of work together musically on them, or kind of compose any of this stuff, or how was it putting it together in the studio?
Yeah, it was a mix. I mean, I had a batch of songs that I had written and arranged, so there's specific parts for every instrument. So that's what I brought to the band, and then they learned what I had. So there's most of the songs, you know, very specific drum patterns and drum fills, specific guitar parts and keyboard parts that I had written. And then as we kind of fleshed them out together, there are some parts that had room for improvisation or solos, and they had some ideas in terms of tones and and we kind of expanded some of them. There's a few songs where we wrote sections together, and then I was producing the record in the studio and calling the shots there.
Cool. I like your approach. It's really unique. This this was something that you saw a lot in the 60s and 70s, where someone was a sort of a composer and producer and got the players into the studio and sort of created the musical landscape, from your own imagination, which is really not something that you hear about much nowadays. I think about David Axelrod or things like that. Who were some of your? Were you influenced by any particular composer or producers growing up? I imagine that you see I have my big record collection, but I imagine yours is better, maybe smaller, but better quality. I have a feeling, Frank.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's how I see myself, and that's how I've tried to have my career go in that direction. Everything I've done, all my records so far, I've sort of had that approach or been influenced by that approach. So, I mean, I'm influenced less by bands and more by composers like Piero Miliani, Ennio Morricone, Alessandro Alessandroni, obviously David Axelrod, and a lot of the kind of soundtrack and library music composers mainly. But that's my approach is really, the same.
Right. And you mentioned Morricone and some other film composers, and I'm listening to this record and I'm thinking to myself, this is like the soundtrack album to a film that doesn't exist. When are you making the movie to go with the music? I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Give Hollywood a call for me.
Right. I'll let them know. By the way, everybody, I think you could post that somewhere on Twitter. By the way, I have a soundtrack to the film that doesn't exist yet. Have you done film work in the past, Frank?
Yeah, there's some stuff in the pipeline. Sure, I've done a few shorts, but there's some kind of fuller length things that are in the works right now.
Oh, that's cool. That's
always been a bit of a not an end goal, but part of the trajectory that I try to plot for myself.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a move for you for sure. That would be the place where you'd end up. So tell us all about your musical journey. You've got this. You're a California person originally.
Yeah, I'm from Los Angeles.
But you've become this sort of global person, jumping around from Paris to Geneva and putting music together. What's the journey? How did you get to where you are today? What's the story?
Yeah, so my project's been around for about 10 years. And I started, playing in LA in the LA scene, sort of when there was a lot of garagey stuff going on, and maybe about 2011, 2012. I made my first record, Shadows, which was sort of, maybe even same zone where I was really kind of composing sort of cinematic soundtrack stuff. It's kind of the genesis of where I've gone. And then through that, I met a Dutch musician called Jaco Gardner, who does sort of, at the time he was doing sort of Baroque psychedelic stuff. And, one thing led to another. I ended up joining his band and moving to the Netherlands and playing with him for a few years. And we did a lot of tours of the US and Europe. And then when that project ended, I came to Paris for a few years. And then I did my second album, Tulips, which is sort of, written and recorded in Holland. And that came out 2017. And sort of through that, I got more opportunities in that world. And the Souvenir record came next, and really just writing that in Paris and meeting Leclerc and doing that, really kind of maximizing or taking advantage of the kind of freedom I have in Europe to be able to travel around. And Geneva's, 2.5 hours away from here by train.
Right.
Amsterdam's 2.5 hours from here by train. So there's a lot. It's much smaller than it seems. So it gives me a lot of space to sort of move around and make things happen.
Well, so, I'll bet the people you went to high school with think you're very cool and adventurous and brave, and that you followed the musical muse. You saw these opportunities, and a lot of musicians, I think, would be scared to probably make the moves and the travels and hang out with people. Follow the music, follow the muse that you've done. Do you feel that way?
Well, that's sort of been my that's sort of my MO, is really just doing something different and following my instincts and going what seems the most interesting path for me. This project was never a band. It was never you know, approached that way. So it also gives me a lot of room to kind of chart my own course,
Right.
and go where I want to go, follow my influences, and follow my instincts.
Tell us about. I just mentioned the record collection, but what are some? This album has a very, like it's a record. It feels like a record more than. And I know that sounds kind of stupid nowadays because everything's coming out on vinyl and everything's got that
Sure.
that sort of angle, but this really feels like one of my Serge Gainsbourg records or something like that, and it feels very of a time, but it still feels contemporary. What are some of your do you have some records that are real touchstones in your life that you heard, particular albums that really resonated with you?
Sure. Well, maybe, most recently or through the last few years, especially when I was making this record, I listened to a lot of soundtracks and a lot of library records. So, I mean, maybe that comes across on Souvenir, but there's definitely a bit of an arc in terms of the diversity of songs and some, diversity of tones, but also having a general vibe all the way through. So like a lot of work by Piero Emiliani. Il Corpo is one of my favorites. That's one I still listen to a lot. Alessandroni has a few albums, Prisma Sonora and Discovery. Those are ones that really stood out to me and that I've kind of, influenced a lot of what I've done. A lot of library stuff from KPM.
So
John
a lot of those
Cameron.
Italian soundtrack composers and the library records. How did you, as a young man, really connect with those things? How did you find out about that stuff?
That's a good question. I was sort of always had a flirtation with that. Just honestly, starting with Morricone from films. Even my first record has a lot of references to that on it.
How did you even get into film? I mean, when I went to a couple film classes in college, and I had a great film professor, and learned about some of this stuff. But it's such a different path from pop music and just listening to I don't even want to say the radio because that's a different thing nowadays. But how did you sort of find that angle? Did you have some good friends that were into film, or was there a spark there somewhere? What sort of illuminated the path for you? You're just so cool. You just found it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I'm just a really cool guy. I just always kind of I mean, there's not much more to it. I think, somehow that just was what interested me. And then, thanks to the internet and thanks to, coming up in the time that I did where, things are accessible. One thing always leads to another. You go down the rabbit hole. I was lucky I found some stuff when I was still young because, more or less since I was in my early 20s and was first kind of starting this project, I was looking up to people like Brian Wilson and Van Dyke Parks and sort of studio folks anyways, and maybe being more attracted to the instrumental music. And then that sort of dovetailed with my interest in the sort of sounds and arrangements and stuff that I still am attracted to. And then the years in Holland touring with the Dutch band, a lot of time in the van. All those guys were kind of record collectors and crate diggers, so we all sort of turned each other on to a lot of stuff. And I was exposed to a lot of European music that I wouldn't have been had I not had that experience.
Right.
So there's a lot of things that maybe were more familiar to that group that I was exposed to that, I really connected with, and that kind of, led to me channeling that.
Right. Frank, what's the difference to you between, had you stayed in America, had you stayed in California and done the Los Angeles thing and really tried to just stay stateside? What do you think the differences are having gone to Europe and connecting with a different European crew than you might have if had you stayed in California?
Just the experience, really, and being exposed to so many things that I wouldn't have otherwise been. I love LA. LA's in my heart. I'll always go back there. It's an inspiring place too, but having grown up there, I think just the new experience. I've always been a curious person and a bit of a traveler, so just just the experience of living somewhere else and being exposed to different cultures and, seeing a lot of the world. I was lucky in the Dutch band because we toured mainly in Europe. So I got to see a lot of Europe many times. And, that just really influenced my perspective and the way I see things, the way I see art, kind of my taste in general. I think LA maybe would have kept me a little bit more stagnant. Because I don't really have any friends in LA that are interested in the same stuff that I am.
Right.
Although they appreciate it, but I don't know anybody really that follows this sort of stuff.
Right. How about your family and friends? What's your family and friend situation? Are they like, Frank, where are you? Come home,
Well, luckily I don't have either, so I'm fine. I have some good friends in LA. But most of my good friends are in bands and they also tour a lot and I get to see them. And I'm back in LA a couple times a year. So then during the pandemic, I was in LA most of the time. So I got to reconnect a bit. But part of my charm is that I never outstay my welcome, and that I'd rather be missed than oversaturate the market.
Right. I understand. Yes, I just visited my cousin and her family. I brought my family to stay in her house with her family, and after a few days, I said, "It's time for me. It's time for us to leave you now."
Yeah. The memories are fond. I like to have people remember me as as a fun time and not somebody that's always around.
Always around, right? You don't want to be too easy to find. Cool.
Exactly.
Back to the record. Any particular songs on there that have an interesting story, an interesting background, whether it be composition or recording or collaborating or putting together, or just a favorite of yours?
Yeah, sure. There's a few of them. My favorite track on the album is L'eau bleue, which is blue water in French. That was one of the first ones I wrote for the record. I think it was the first take that we used, but it still speaks to me when I hear it. I think we performed it really well. It's a really nice, really nice song. And the bridge of that song I wrote with Leclerc, so that the middle part is a very collaborative part, and so I see that one as being kind of emblematic of our collaboration. Another one would be Swiss Franc, which the title is just now because it's coming out soon. The title's now I'm realizing how silly it is, but at the time when we named it that, it was it kind of just went over my head. So Swiss Franc is the closer of the album, and it's a pretty heavy track, and it's always been a live audience favorite. And I think when we play it and when I hear it, it kind of feels a bit like an anthem for what we were trying to do there.
You did record the album to tape, which is a very expensive proposition and requires a little different thought process with editing and things like that. And people are just very simply recording digitally nowadays. But I feel it really gives it a different. I really want to hear this thing on vinyl. I didn't get a copy of it. I don't know if it exists yet, but I really want to crank.
I don't have a copy either.
Well, I know everything's all backed up. It's hard to get, but it sounds like
my friends have it.
What's that?
All my friends have it.
Oh, they have it?
I think I'm just a little too far away. Yeah.
So it's around.
Oh no, it's available. Yeah. I mean, it's not out yet, but they exist. So I'm just hoping the mail goes fast.
I'm sure you'll get it. You'll get it over there in Paris. But tell us about the decision to record to tape.
Yeah. So all my previous records, like the Shadows and Tulips, I recorded by myself. Playing, all the instruments and taking my time with those. I've always used Logic, which I love, which I always will still use. And so for this batch of songs, even before I had Leclerc involved, I knew that I wanted to try something different because there's a lot that I could learn from a new experience and just to see sort of how I would fare in that sort of situation. So getting Leclerc on board, the idea was, to do sort of the opposite approach and learn it with the band and then come in and try to do, full takes,
right,
straight to tape, basically play it live. And at the same time, I have a really close friend named Jasper Geluk, who was the sound engineer in the Dutch band that I used to be in. He lives in Haarlem, Netherlands. And it's actually part of how I know Leclerc was he recorded one of their albums and sent it to me. And that was part of our introduction. So I knew I wanted to work with him as well, and work with an engineer I really trusted. So those few things kind of came together in his studio, and I really trust him. He's the best out there. He has a great studio in Harlem called Tone Boutique, and so we convened there and we did it live to tape, and very different experience.
Right.
It was to have the energy in the room from everybody, and everybody being really excited and listening to playbacks immediately. That was an amazing experience, something that really kept the momentum going and really kind of allowed, you can hear it on the record, the kind of excitement and the enthusiasm, because we did it in about maybe 3 days, the entire record. So wow. That experience in itself was really great and really unique. I think it shows on the record. But it was mostly the idea of just trying to approach things a little bit differently for this one, and seeing how that would turn out. It also gave me some more room to just produce, being able to just listen to everybody, give direction, not having my hands on the mixing board.
How did you communicate? Did you have a language barrier, or do you speak French or whatever? What was the? How did you kind of work that out, or did they speak English? Or
Switzerland has an excellent education system, so they're all fluent in English. So fluent that they can understand my jokes and know how bad they are.
Right.
So they all speak perfect English, and the same goes for the Dutch fellas that I used to work with. Although I speak Dutch, we always communicated in English, and my French is okay. I can tell some stupid jokes in French, but we used. Luckily, we got to use my language.
Frank, my only critique is it's too short. I want more. I get into this thing and I'm listening to it and I say, it's over, it's done. Are you thinking about volume 2 or another project with them, or what's coming down the pike, or what are you doing?
That's a common criticism of all my albums. Yeah. They're usually, everything I've done is usually about that length. I think Souvenir probably could have been longer. But in terms of like the scheduling of when we were all free at the same time, I had this many songs and decided to just go for it. So it's a little bit of a mini album or an extended EP type thing. Yeah, I'll definitely continue working with Leclerc. I made another record last year by myself, which had a few members of Leclerc on it, but I was in Los Angeles, so we were just sort of working remotely. That's a record that came out on KPM, actually, as a library record called Panorama.
I saw that. It looks very interesting. What's the story with that record?
Yeah, so I work with a label in England called Be With Records, and they usually reissue library music. They do all the KPM stuff. They do other soundtrack stuff, and they're an amazing label. So they've done a few reissues for me for my record Tulips. They've kept that in print, and for another record called Darkland. So they actually connected me with KPM, and KPM commissioned this record from me. So I was able to make something, for their catalog, which will also come out on vinyl this year as a proper record. But that was a really great experience. And I was able to have, Ellie, the bass player from Leclerc, played bass on most of it. And I had Stefan from Leclerc play on it. Great whistler called Molly Lewis is on it. So that was a really interesting project, which informed sort of what I will do next, which will be a blend of that and the workflow with Leclerc. So having learned from the studio experience with Leclerc and applying that to the record that I did last year, I think in the future it will be a blend of recording live in the studio and then taking some time to myself and do some overdubs and take my time with the mixes and maybe going back and forth between those two approaches.
Cool. And what a full circle thing it is for you to be on that KPM label after listening to those KPM records for so many years, I'm sure. And to listeners who don't know, those library records are very desirable. They're also very expensive. They're hard to find.
Thanks to Be With, you can get the reissues for pretty reasonable prices.
Oh, well, that's true. I guess that's
thanks
true.
To Be With.
Right. I guess the reissues are reasonable, but the original copies certainly were, in my day, they were like, whoa, you found that, it was a big deal. But
very sought after stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's very cool to have your name attached there, and you're a part of the KPM story.
Yeah. good for my resume.
It is.
Definitely.
Tell me about Ghost. Tell me about singing that part on Ghost and just doing vocals in general, because, you kind of have this, the vocal tracks work very cool, and then the instrumental stuff is great. But is there one you prefer to do than the other, or you know what I'm saying?
So my first record, Shadows, is sort of a blend between some vocal songs. At the time I mentioned, I was listening to a lot of Brian Wilson stuff, and especially the instrumentals by the Beach Boys, and so that was sort of the vibe of that first record, was half instrumental, half vocal, sort of pop-ish songs.
Right.
And then with Tulips, I went full instrumental. There's a little bit of vocals, but they're sort of just ethereal, pads of
right.
vocals. And then for the next one, for Souvenir, I figured it'd be nice to try to write a few vocal songs, just to sort of prove to myself that I could, and maybe do another little bit of a blend. And those were the result of that. I think those were some of the first ones I wrote, were the vocal songs. Wondering if it would be for this project, or maybe for another project, or for somebody to sing. And as the arrangements started coming together, they sounded a bit. They sounded more cohesive with the whole.
Mm-hmm.
So those, and then playing them with LeClaire as well, I think they really helped flesh them out to where it really worked. And the song Ghost, which I really like, I'm not sure if I'm really suited to sing it, because it's quite hard to sing. And I actually, on the last tours that we did in the States and in Europe, singing that song actually destroyed my vocal cords.
Oh.
To where I
Couldn't
actually
you find
developed
a nice Dutch female singer to do that?
Exactly, right, yeah. No, I fried my vocal cords for a little while after doing that night after night. But I've learned how to do it a little bit safer. But yeah, it's nice. I like to sing, and I think it's good to sort of balance the instrumental stuff with the vocal stuff. People like to hear vocals, that's just a fact. Although I really do prefer making instrumental music, because as soon as my voice is in it, it sort of takes on a certain character.
Right.
Where when it's instrumental, I could almost listen to it as an outsider and still enjoy it without hearing. Nobody likes the sound of their own voice. Speak
for yourself, Frank. I listen to myself all day. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. Yeah. Well, you have a beautiful voice, though.
Oh, thank you very much.
If I had that voice, I'd be fond of it, too.
Yeah, I know. Well, I like to hear it, but my wife is a different story. She's got to listen to it all day, too. Well, Frank, congratulations on the record. It's really, really cool. And unfortunately, this interview is going to cost me money, because now I want to go out and buy everything that you've recorded, and I want to go and find everything in your catalog. So thanks.
That's so nice to hear.
Thanks for.
Well, that's good for me.
It's good for you, but it's bad for my wallet. And you do have a really interesting catalog that I have just scratched the surface of, although I spent a lot of time with this record. But I'm really intrigued by your work, and I think you've got a really cool, unique thing going on. And I really want to delve into the Frank world a little bit more here.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
You got it. Keep it up, and thanks for spending the time with me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. You got to come see us when the world opens up and we're touring through your part of the woods.
Absolutely. Or maybe I should be brave and be adventurous like you, and I should come see you in Paris or somewhere else.
Well, you're more than welcome.
Can I crash on that? You have a couch over there I can crash on?
Sure. It's a fold out. There's some space.
Very good. That's you're going to get me out of my safety zone.
You're more than welcome.
All right, Frank. You take it easy. Stay safe out there.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.